I feel like a lot of the gaming industry nowadays can be described as like junk food, you know, like there's not any real substance to a lot of these games. They've been dumbed down to the point where they hold your hand through every puzzle, every combat encounter. There's just no depth or real sustenance there, you know? And it leaves me, and I think a lot of other players, hungry for something real, something intense. And I am pretty sure that the most substantive, intense, and real video game probably of the year is about to come out, and that's Path of Exile 2. This, of course, is the upcoming game from GGG, which is the studio that did Shocker, Path of Exile 1. And if you're not familiar with Path of Exile, it is basically like the ARPG to end all ARPGs. It is extremely intense. It is very, very deep in terms of customization, in terms of loot, in terms of endgame, in terms of build quality. Like everything about it is the best in its class as far as I'm aware. And it looks like the sequel, Path of Exile 2, which was announced like 5 years ago, which is set to come out here in just a couple days. This is looking like it's going to be the definitive ARPG on the market. Like step aside Diablo 4, there's a new king in town. But here's the thing you have to understand about Path of Exile is that this is not one of those junk food games. This is a beef Wellington. This is a freaking tomahawk steak. This is shepherd's pie. There is so much here. I'm just hungry. That's what I'm realizing. Damn it. I gotta stop filming these videos while I'm hungry. Yes, I said hungry. Lay off me. But just to give you an idea of how intense this is, look at this. Somebody's actually already gone through and made like an interactive skill tree viewer for different classes that you can swap. The game's not out yet, by the way. They've just done this so once the game is out, they can easily reroute stuff and build it out so people can start to work on their builds. But this is what we're dealing with when it comes to skill trees and stuff in Path of Exile. It is unapologetically intense and complicated. But all this brings me to kind of the thesis of this video, which is that Path of Exile 2 not only looks very, very good, but it looks very good specifically because it does so much different than the standard AAA game in 2024. And I think that it should be a wake-up call to many, many developers that players don't want something boiled down and super lacking in substance to make it accessible and approachable. Players want substance, players want a challenge, players want depth, and that seems to be exactly what Path of Exile 2 is bringing to the table, and we're going to talk about it. And of course, a thank you to our sponsor, Will Follow the Light. So this is a little bit different than what we typically do, but Will Follow the Light is an indie game being made by 16 people. They don't have a publisher. They don't have anything like that. The entire production of the game has been financed out of their own pockets. And they asked if I was willing to just react to their trailer and share it with you guys. And so that's what we're going to do. Let's check out the trailer for this indie game. So here it is. Tomorrowhead Studio, like I said, a brand new studio. They've got 16 employees. And my understanding is the premise of this game is that it melds a lot of sort of Nordic adventuring and sailing into a game that has a lot of puzzle mechanics as well.
Crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, or lose the common touch. If neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run,
with some
yours
light
is the earth
poetry
and everything that's in it, and which is more, you'll be a man, my son.
One of the games they said that inspired them was Alan Wake 2. I can see that. I can see that. They also apparently have like full like sailing mechanics in this as you sail around the different fjords to try and rediscover your family and those close to you. It's based on actual simulations of sailing one of these little yachts through these rough seas. And I mean, if you guys don't know anything about me, I'm big into boats too. I love this kind of thing. Like I literally have a Titanic behind me on my bookshelf. And it's a looker too. It's a beautiful game. Will Follow the Light wishlist coming to Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam. Well, there you go. Will Follow the Light, coming from Tomorrowhead Studio, a small indie team working on their very first project together. It strikes all the tonal vibes I eat up in these types of indie games. It's pretty, and it has boat stuff in it, which I'm all for, honestly. And I love to see indie teams working on original stuff. I think that this is great. So next year, they're going to have a demo that's coming out. All they've asked is for me to share this trailer with you and ask you to check out the game on their Steam page. Wishlist it if you're interested. Check out the demo when that launches sometime next year. And if you're also able to follow them on their social media, if you think the game looks interesting, do that too. Again, all of those links will be in the description box below. Thank you again to Tomorrowhead for sponsoring the video, and well done on what seems to be a pretty interesting new game from a new studio. Okay, so first I want to establish the premise upon which this video is being built, which is that a lot of AAA games are intentionally being dumbed down and oversimplified in the pursuit of approachability, I guess, or maybe modern gamers coming at it. And all of that, I feel, is built on faulty assumptions that players like things that are dumbed down and don't mind it when depth is stripped out. So let me give you a few examples. To point to a recent example, Dragon Age: The Veilguard was a sequel to a well-established, massive RPG franchise. The previous games were known for their narrative depth, their consequence within narrative choices, and even games like Dragon Age Inquisition featured tactical combat that, while very, very clunky, did at least offer some customization and depth. All of the companions had complex motivations. They would remember what you did hours and hours before, and that would alter their behavior and choices later. And there were even systems put in place for you to transfer your choices from previous games forward, called the Keep, where you could actually move your choices from Dragon Age Origins, for example, over, and even that could have cascading effects all the way through Dragon Age Inquisition. There was a lot of complexity there. However, with Dragon Age: The Veilguard, almost every single aspect of the game, except for the hair simulation, was significantly walked back and dumbed down. In my opinion, the writing has gotten extremely lackluster and lacking in any sort of complexity and depth. Dialogue choices basically whittled down to saying yes in 3 different ways, or offering encouragement in a number of different ways. There aren't really any bad choices to be had here. There's no way to tell one of your companions to suck it up and stop whining. There's nothing like that. You just are a good friend that pats them on the head whenever they do. And then you go and say, yeah, let's do that. No matter what you actually want to do, it always plays out the same way. There's basically no narrative depth except for in the last mission where everything is determined based on whether you grind it out max leveling each of your companions. No spoilers in case you want to play it because it did just come out. But really, there's not a lot of depth there. But if you want to hear my full thoughts, I'll have the video linked below where I talked with my wife, who's a big Dragon Age fan, about it. And we went through all the details. So if you want to hear my extended thoughts, even including some spoilers at the end of that video, links below. But point is, Dragon Age: The Veilguard took everything that made the original games really intense, meaty, dare I say girthy. All of that was stripped out in the pursuit of some boiled down, oversimplified, lackluster milquetoast experience that I really don't know who it was meant for. It's really bizarre and it's quite disappointing. Another example of the dumbing down that's happened in the AAA space would be with puzzles and quest objectives in massive games. This was a whole story with God of War Ragnarok, where Atreus or other companions, as you went through various levels, would call out the solution to puzzles before you even realized there was a puzzle to be solved. And this has happened in many games as well. It was just called out by IGN of all outlets with Avowed, the upcoming RPG from Obsidian, where companions start to solve puzzles for you without you asking for it, without you wanting it. You could know the solution. You could have figured it out yourself, or maybe you want to figure it out because it's a puzzle after all, and you kind of should have to think about it. But instead, the companions just call out the solution, and then you get a little quest objective marker pointing in the solution's direction so you know where to go. It removes any thought. It's like insulting, in my opinion, to suggest that players just want to go turn their brain off and then like drool while they go through the motions of something. Like, no, if it's a puzzle, there should be challenge. That's okay. And I've tried to figure out why so many companies have been doing this. There's suggestions that maybe it's because they are just too focused on focus group testing, where they bring in 15 different people of these different demographics and they all test it, and then they see, oh, these 2 people said the puzzle was too hard, so we're going to dumb it down, or we're going to give options where the companion comes in and solves the puzzle for them and all of that. I don't know though. I really don't know what it is. It does feel like maybe it is just game design by committee going awry, but either way, it drives me crazy because these puzzles should be challenging and instead they solve themselves if there's any complexity or depth there to begin with, which in the case of like Dragon Age of Veilguard, again, no depth, no puzzle complexity at all. Even if companions don't solve it for you, there's nothing really there to sink your teeth into, and the puzzles are like, turn this here and put this shield with a lion on the lion statue. You did it, good job. Like, it's kindergarten at best. And it drives me all the more crazy because the easy solution, which I believe they added after the fact to God of War Ragnarok, is to just have a setting in the menus where you can toggle on companion hints for puzzles. Just toggle it on. Then the dialogue triggers where Atreus says, oh, shoot that water thing up there. It'll freeze it and the water will pour down here. Toggle that in the settings. If I need help, I can seek it out. Otherwise, make me think about it. That's okay. And a third and final example of the excessive dumbing down and oversimplification of a massive, formerly beloved franchise would be the oversimplification of the Assassin's Creed games. You know, back in the day, Assassin's Creed games had social stealth. They had all sorts of different cool tools to use within stealth sequences as you worked through levels. They had black box missions, for example, with like AC Unity, where you would go through levels and you could go through these challenges in 15 different ways, each time discovering something different because there were so many different routes that they had taken into account. Nowadays, what we see with the most recent game, big AAA game that is, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, we see all of that having been stripped out, and even something as iconic as parkour has been removed or simplified to the point where it basically is nothing. Back in the day with AC Unity, if you wanted to parkour up an object, you had to hold down right trigger and then A or X on your controller to climb up. And if you wanted to go down and free climb down, you would hold down right trigger and B or circle to descend. And if you wanted to just parkour forward, you just held down right trigger and then they would maintain their height or altitude, whatever they were parkouring over. Doesn't sound crazy complicated, but there were 3 different ways for you to control the assassin, in this case Arno, as he navigated the levels, and there was a good amount of complexity with movement that could be found there, especially when you add in other things such as jumping off walls with extra button inputs and things like that. With AC Valhalla, it's been dumbed down over the last few games to the point where you literally just hold down the A button or X and run at a wall. That's it. You want to jump off a ledge? Hold down A and jump off the ledge. You can sort of slide down onto a ledge by pressing B or holding down B as you go down, then they'll just kind of drop off ledges. But that is the extent of the depth. Like, that's it. It's been dumbed down so much that it's almost unrecognizable. When you look at AC Unity and you see the parkour versus what you do in Valhalla, it's shocking that that game is the next generation evolution of the franchise when it is objectively oversimplified and dumbed down to the point where it doesn't even look like the same game franchise at all. But those are just 3 examples of the oversimplification in the AAA space, and it drives me up the wall. But then we see games like Path of Exile 2 that come along and seemingly buck the trend, and games like this have consistently outperformed and blown away expectations over the last few years, and I think it's because gamers are really starved for depth and complexity, as franchises they used to love have consistently been dumbed down to the point where they are unrecognizable. And it's not just Path of Exile 2, it's games like Elden Ring, which have also shown that complexity and a lack of handholding can work in massive, massive games. Because guess what? If there's a player that is struggling with a boss and maybe could use a little bit of extra help compared to the people that really love digging into the builds or just have a better understanding of how these types of action RPG games work, those people, if they're struggling, they can just look up a guide. They can Google it. They can look up on YouTube, what's a good build for defeating Radon? And they can do it that way. And you know what? That's okay. The community is there to help those players when they need the help. It's one of the great things about these types of games is that the communities come together to help each other. And I know there's the stereotype of like the purist where it's like, no, don't use guides, don't look up anything. But honestly, I think that represents a pretty vocal minority of the player base of these games. Most people are just glad that everybody's enjoying a game that they're passionate about too. With Path of Exile, Some people will go through a purist run and not touch any guides or anything. Others, from day one, will be looking up guides and trying to get help on Reddit or wherever else. And I think that's great. I think that's okay. However you need to play the game to enjoy it, cool. I'm just glad that the communities are there to work with each other and help each other, even in the face of complexity and really deep, overwhelming otherwise gameplay systems. But perhaps that's the takeaway, is that players working together will always feel better than developers dumbing down something to the point where it's accessible or approachable. I'm all for games being playable by more people, but when it gets to the point where the game loses all sense of identity and complexity and depth, then we're not talking about accessibility. You're fundamentally changing what made that game or franchise great. Because look, we're not talking about streamlining, which I think is something different. We're talking about oversimplification and dumbing down. If you're gonna just streamline something and make it so old gear that you collected now, instead of just sitting in your inventory mixed with all the gear that you currently use, now it's like slotted into a different tab in your inventory screen. That is technically a streamlining of the experience, but it doesn't make the game less intense or less interesting. It doesn't mechanically change anything other than saving you time and headache. That's okay. That's something Path of Exile 2 is doing in a lot of ways compared to the first game, where even with like support gems, they're going to have a system to basically recommend ones for players to try instead of just leaving it up to people to figure out in the moment. That's a good streamlining choice. But if they were to say, come out and say, we've decided to just get rid of 5 classes, we're just gonna have the one, no 6 classes, we're gonna have one, and it's gonna be a warrior build and everybody's gonna use the same weapons, it would start to lose what made Path of Exile great and interesting for so many people. That's an oversimplification and dumbing down. Streamlining is okay. But listen, to just summarize all this, Path of Exile 2 will not be for everybody, but I think that's why it is so exciting for the people it is appealing to. It's not trying to be everything to everybody. It's not trying to be the most approachable action RPG to move the most units according to a spreadsheet. It's just trying to be the best game it can be for the people that like this kind of thing. There will be some people who jump in, play it for 50 hours and call it good, but there also will be people that put 5,000 hours into this over the next handful of years, because it has that much depth and complexity and meat on the bone for people to sink their teeth into. And that's what makes this so exciting for those to whom this does appeal. And I think that that's just a crucial difference with a lot of these big AAA studios, is that they get so caught up in the spreadsheets, they get so caught up in the focus groups and everything, that they kind of lose sight of just making the game that they would love to play. And they start trying to make the game they think players want to play. And that's just a dangerous way to design games, in my view, because it's really easy to lose sight of what makes great games great when you're trying to kind of meet players where you think they're going to be in the future, instead of just making something really solid that you're really passionate about. That's the key. And you should, of course, take feedback from the community, from your audience, and from your players. That, of course, is always a great thing. But also, at the end of the day, you just have to be unapologetic in what your game is and double down on it, instead of trying to make this milquetoast thing that checks off the most boxes according to some Excel spreadsheet. Because according to the spreadsheets, I'm guessing this is too much. I'm guessing most of you who have never played like a big ARPG, I'm not super experienced in ARPGs either, but to most of us, this looks insane. This looks very scary. And I can understand why, a game might try to simplify this down into something that's just like, oh, this branch of the skill tree. I can understand that. But also, when I take a moment and I appreciate how much is going on here, and when I look at the history of Path of Exile, the original game, and the depth and complexity that was there, I can appreciate that there is a lot going on here, sure, but it has consequence. It is overwhelming initially, but if you take your time to understand it, or if you use guides or supplemental tools like that, you can decipher this, and the game will reward you for understanding that. And that's what gets me excited. Unlike Assassin's Creed Valhalla's skill bush, which I'll just show you. Yeah, here, this is the skill tree for Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and these little nodes were all like plus 1.2% damage when jumping off a ledge or something. Like, they were all very minimal except for the big nodes that you see here that are marked by larger symbols that had notable abilities or improvements and enhancements. But most of these little nodes were just like basically to build this out and make it look more complicated than it actually was. Even though there wasn't a lot of consequence to those individual nodes, they were still there to build it out. And there was even this button in the middle of it, I remember, which is the auto assign button. So after you reach like level 50 or 100 strength or whatever, you get so many of these points as you play through the game, you start to just get bored of selecting them manually. So they put a button here to auto assign it. You press a button and it puts a skill into the tree automatically. And if you have a skill tree that is so inconsequential that you just start pressing a button so you don't have to think about where you assign points, that's probably not a skill tree worth delving into. Whereas something in like Path of Exile, you have to be very intentional with which route you choose to go, because there is so much that stacks and cascades in terms of impact when you're making that character. When you're pairing this support gem with this one to make this ability do that, there's so much you have to be very, very intentional with. And again, it rewards you for understanding it and taking the time to get it. But listen, there is a lot with Path of Exile. I mean, there's entire channels that are dedicated to going through it, because there's so many different things you can do with support gems within individual skills. And it blows my mind how much variability there is here based on how you build these things out. It's super cool to see. And I'm not going to pretend to understand all of it. I'm not going to pretend like I'm an expert in it, because I'm not. This will be my first big foray into Path of Exile. But what's made it appealing to me is that it's not trying to be dumbed down and appeal to me. You know, like, it's just a massive, intimidating, sure, but a massive and unapologetically complicated game with a lot of depth. And that gets me excited as somebody that has been eating a lot of junk food games this year, which have been overly dumbed down in pursuit of mass market appeal. This is exactly what I'm looking for. And if you want to find out more about it, I encourage you to go watch this Path of Exile 2 endgame content reveal. This is an hour and 20-minute video they dropped before the game even launched, just going through all of the different things they're doing for the end game, for skill trees, for streamlining certain aspects of it to make it easier to understand, though retaining the depth and complexity there. I mean, what other game could drop like an hour plus video going through all of the different mechanics and you just barely start to understand what they're doing here in terms of depth of customization? It's so cool to me and it's very exciting. But as I found out in the live stream clip, which you should go subscribe to my second channel, Luke Stevens Live, for all of those clips, we did a segment on this game and people in the comments were like, just get ready, because once you get into Path of Exile, there's no going back. You know, you're about to lose your life to this one. It's going to consume every waking moment. But you know what? I'm kind of ready for that, because we've got a bit of a lull through December and January, and I'm okay with no lifing this for a couple months. I'm into it. So listen, if you're interested in Path of Exile, they're going early access here in just a few days. Once they do that, you're going to be able to play the game. It's a $30 basically entry fee for early access. But when it goes into 1.0 and leaves early access probably sometime next year, it will be free to play, where you can just jump in and it's monetized with cosmetics and stuff, which is cool. Nothing gameplay affecting or anything like that. So if you want to jump in, it's going to be available here in just a couple days. They expect millions and millions of players, and I am fully expecting that they will see that. I am somebody that historically has not been that into ARPGs that are this like complicated and intense, but I think specifically because of the context of what's been going on in the industry the last few years, and with some recent RPGs that have really been lackluster in my view, this is a game that could not have come a moment too soon, and I'm excited to get into it. And I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say in the comment section below, because I'm sure there are some Path of Exile fans that are down there, or maybe some people that are just passively interested that want to check it out for the first time. And I'm looking forward to seeing the conversation that happens down there, because I think a lot of other people are in the same boat that I am. I'm just hopeful that the launch goes smoothly, because when you have this many players that are interested in one big game, I mean, it can be intense and very difficult to pull off. So I hope that they manage it, but time will tell. But that's going to do it for me. If you want to see me do a video when the launch actually happens, showing you what the game is actually like, let me know. Also like the video if you enjoyed it, so I know that you're interested in more of these ARPG style videos. But with that, much love. I'm going to keep watching videos on Path of Exile now. So Gucci. I'll see you in the next one. Hugs and kisses. Bye.